The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight, turning the busy streets of downtown into a maze of umbrellas and hurried footsteps. Inside Romano's, the city's most expensive restaurant, the warm golden light felt like a different world entirely. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on white tablecloths, and the soft sound of classical music mixed with quiet conversations and the gentle clinking of expensive silverware. David sat alone at table 12, the same corner spot he had reserved every Tuesday evening for the past 2 years. His phone buzzed constantly against the white tablecloth, but he barely glanced at it anymore. At 50 years old, he had built a technology company worth billions, but success had become as routine as his weekly dinner ritual. The same restaurant, the same table, the same expensive meal that he barely tasted. Tonight was no different. The waiter had brought him the chef's special, a perfectly prepared steak that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. David cut small pieces mechanically while scrolling through emails on his phone. Stock prices, meeting requests, contract approvals, the endless stream of business that had consumed his life for decades. He pushed the half-eaten steak around his plate, his mind already moving to tomorrow's board meeting. The food was excellent as always, but David couldn't remember the last time he had actually enjoyed a meal. Everything felt automatic now, like he was living his life on autopilot. Outside, the rain grew heavier. David could see people rushing past the large windows, their coats pulled tight against the cold October wind. Most of them probably couldn't afford to eat at a place like Romano's, he thought briefly, then returned to his phone. A new email from Tokyo needed his immediate attention. The waiter approached with practiced politeness. "Will there be anything else this evening, Mr. Thompson?" David looked down at his plate. More than half the expensive steak remained untouched, along with the fancy vegetables and imported potatoes. "No, I'm finished. Just bring me the check." As the waiter cleared his plate, David noticed a small commotion near the restaurant's entrance. The manager was speaking in hushed tones to someone just outside the door. Through the glass, David could barely make out a figure in the rain, someone without an umbrella standing under the small awning. The manager returned inside, shaking his head slightly. He whispered something to the hostess, who glanced toward the entrance with a worried expression. David had seen this kind of thing before. Sometimes homeless people tried to come into expensive restaurants, looking for warmth or food. The staff usually handled these situations quietly, without disturbing the paying customers. David signed his credit card receipt, $230 for a meal he had barely touched. As he prepared to leave, he slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and stood up from the table. That's when he heard the voice. "Excuse me, sir." The voice was soft, almost apologetic. David turned around to see a woman standing a few feet away from his table. She was soaking wet from the rain, her brown hair plastered against her face. Her clothes were clean, but obviously old. A thin jacket that had seen better days and jeans with small patches where they had been carefully mended. But it wasn't her appearance that caught David's attention. It was her eyes. They were green and intelligent, filled with a mixture of desperation and dignity that he hadn't expected. She stood straight despite her obvious discomfort, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and polite. "I'm sorry to bother you," she continued, "but I noticed you didn't finish your meal. I don't mean to be rude, but would it be possible? Could I have your leftovers?" The restaurant fell completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused halfway to every mouth. The soft classical music suddenly seemed too loud in the quiet room. David could feel dozens of eyes watching this uncomfortable scene unfold. The woman, she looked to be in her 30s, seemed to realize that everyone was staring. Her cheeks turned red with embarrassment, but she didn't look away from David. There was something about her that reminded him of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. "I know this is unusual," she said quietly, "and I understand if you say no. I thought maybe instead of throwing the food away." Her voice trailed off. She looked down at her worn shoes, water still dripping from her jacket onto the expensive carpet. David could see her hands shaking, though he wasn't sure if it was from cold or nervousness. Behind her, the restaurant manager was approaching quickly, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately. This is completely inappropriate behavior." The manager reached for the woman's arm, but she stepped back politely. "I'm sorry," she said to him, then turned back to David. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I'll go now." But something made David hold up his hand to stop the manager. Maybe it was the way the woman had asked so politely, even though she was obviously desperate. Maybe it was how she had apologized for bothering him, as if her hunger was something to be ashamed of. Or maybe it was something in her eyes that reminded him of his own mother, though that was a memory he usually tried to avoid. "Wait," David said, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet restaurant. The woman looked up at him, hope and fear mixed in her expression. The manager stopped in his tracks, confusion written across his face. Other diners leaned forward slightly, curious about what would happen next. David looked at the woman more carefully. Despite her wet clothes and obvious difficult circumstances, she carried herself with dignity. She hadn't demanded anything or made a scene. She had simply asked, politely and quietly, for something that would otherwise be thrown away. "What's your name?" David asked. "Anna," she replied softly. "Anna Rodriguez." "Anna," David repeated, the name feeling strange in his mouth. When was the last time he had asked someone's name just to know it? Not for business reasons. "How long since you've eaten?" Anna hesitated, as if admitting the truth would make her seem weak. 2 days, she finally whispered. The words hit David like a physical blow. 2 days. He spent more on wine with dinner than this woman had probably seen in months, and she hadn't eaten in 2 days. Around them, he could hear other diners shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The manager cleared his throat. "Sir, if you'd prefer, we can handle this situation privately." But David raised his hand again. Something was happening inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It was as if Anna's simple request had cracked open a door in his heart that he had kept locked for decades. "Anna," he said, making a decision that would change both their lives forever, "would you like to sit down?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Every person in Romano's seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Anna looked at David with wide eyes, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. The manager stood frozen between them, his mouth slightly open in shock. "Sit down?" Anna repeated quietly, as if making sure she had heard correctly. David nodded toward the empty chair across from him. "Please, sit down." For a moment, Anna didn't move. She glanced around the restaurant, taking in the expensive decorations, the well-dressed customers, and the waiters in their crisp black uniforms. Everything about this place screamed money and status, things that felt completely foreign to her current life. I'm very wet," she said, looking down at her dripping jacket. "I don't want to ruin your chair." Something about her concern for the furniture, even in her desperate state, made David's chest tighten. When was the last time someone had worried about inconveniencing him? Most people in his world wanted something from him, and they rarely cared about small courtesies. "The chair will be fine," David said gently. "Please." Anna slowly walked around the table and carefully sat down on the edge of the chair, as if she might need to leave quickly. Water from her clothes immediately soaked into the expensive fabric, but David didn't seem to notice or care. The manager finally found his voice. "Mr. Thompson, are you sure about this? Perhaps we could arrange something more private." David looked at the manager, a thin man named Robert who had been working at Romano's for 15 years. David had never bothered to learn much about him beyond his name and his efficiency at handling wealthy customers. "Robert," David said calmly, "could you please bring us some towels and maybe a warm drink for my guest?" Robert's eyes widened. In all his years of serving David, he had never heard him use the word guest for anyone other than business associates or other wealthy diners. "Of course, sir," Robert stammered, then hurried away toward the kitchen. Around them, the other diners were trying to pretend they weren't watching, but David could feel their stares. Some looked curious, others seemed annoyed that their expensive evening was being interrupted by this unusual scene. A few were openly recording with their phones, probably planning to post about it on social media later. David turned his attention back to Anna, who was sitting very still in her chair. Now that she was closer, he could see more details about her face. She had laugh lines around her eyes, suggesting that despite her current circumstances, she had known happiness. Her hands were clean but rough, with small scars that spoke of hard work. But it was her eyes that held him. They were the same shade of green as his mother's had been, and they held the same mixture of strength and exhaustion that he remembered from his childhood. The recognition hit him like a punch to the stomach. Suddenly, David was 8 years old again, sitting in their tiny apartment kitchen while his mother counted coins on the table. She had been trying to figure out if they had enough money for both rent and groceries that month. He remembered watching her divide the money into small piles, her face serious with concentration. "Mom," young David had asked, "are we poor?" His mother had looked up at him with those same green eyes, filled with determination despite their circumstances. "No, baby," she had said. "We're just going through a hard time. But we're going to be okay." She had been wrong about that last part. Things had gotten much worse before they got better. But she had never let David see her break, never let him feel ashamed of their situation. Robert returned with a stack of white towels and a steaming cup of coffee. He set them down in front of Anna, who looked surprised by the kindness. "Thank you," she said to Robert, then looked at David. "And thank you. I promise I won't stay long." David watched as Anna carefully dried her hair with one of the towels. Her movements were precise and economical, like someone who had learned not to waste anything, even small gestures. "You don't have to rush," David said. "Take your time." Anna wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup and took a small sip. The relief on her face was immediate, not just from the warmth, but from the simple comfort of holding something hot. "I know this must seem strange," Anna said after a moment. "I don't usually. I've never done anything like this before." "What changed tonight?" David asked. Anna was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My daughter is in the hospital," she said. "She's been there for 3 weeks now. The doctors say she's getting better, but..." Her voice trailed off. David could see tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them back with the same determination he had seen in his mother's face all those years ago. "The medical bills," Anna continued. "They took everything. Our house, our car, our savings, everything. I've been staying at a shelter, but they have rules about how long you can stay. And I haven't been able to eat much because every dollar I can find goes toward bus fare to visit her." David felt something crack open inside his chest. "How old is your daughter?" 12, Anna said, and now the tears did fall. "Her name is Sophia. She's the bravest person I know. She keeps telling me not to worry, that everything will be okay. But she's 12 years old and she's fighting for her life, and I can't even afford to buy her favorite ice cream when she asks for it." Anna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You don't need to hear about my problems, but David did need to hear it. For the first time in years, he was listening to someone talk about something real. Something that mattered more than stock prices or quarterly profits or board meetings. "What's wrong with Sophia?" he asked gently. "Leukemia," Anna said. "The doctors caught it early and they say the treatment is working. But the chemotherapy makes her so sick, and she's missed so much school. She used to love reading, but now she can barely stay awake long enough to finish a page." David thought about his own childhood, about how his mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat after his father left. She had cleaned offices at night, worked at a grocery store during the day, and took in sewing on weekends. He rarely saw her, but when he did, she always asked about his schoolwork and made sure he knew how proud she was of him. "You remind me of someone," David said suddenly. Anna looked up at him, surprised by the change in his voice. "My mother," David continued. "She raised me alone after my father left. We didn't have much money, but she never let me see her give up. Even when things were really bad." Robert appeared at their table again, looking nervous. "Mr. Thompson? The kitchen is about to close, but Chef Martinez wanted to know if you'd like him to prepare anything special." David looked at Anna, who was still holding the coffee cup like it was the most precious thing in the world. An idea began forming in his mind, not just about dinner, but about something much bigger. "Tell Chef Martinez," David said slowly, "that I'd like him to prepare his best meal. The full tasting menu, for 2. Anna's eyes went wide. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly. That's too much. I just asked for leftovers." But David was already making a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Anna," he said, looking directly into those familiar green eyes, "when was the last time someone took care of you?" The question seemed to surprise her. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Finally, she whispered, "I can't remember." "Then tonight," David said, "let someone take care of you." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Anna stared at David, her coffee cup trembling slightly in her hands. Around them, the restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm. But something fundamental had shifted in the small space they occupied together. "I don't understand," Anna said quietly. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." David leaned back in his chair, surprised by the question. Why was he doing this? For 20 years, he had built walls around himself, focusing only on business, on profit, on the next deal. He had trained himself not to get involved in other people's problems. But sitting here with Anna, those walls felt like they were crumbling. "I'm not sure I know either," David admitted, "but something about tonight feels different." Robert approached their table again, this time accompanied by Chef Martinez himself. The chef was a small man with kind eyes and hands that moved constantly as he spoke. "Mr. Thompson," Chef Martinez said with a slight accent, "it would be my honor to prepare something special for you and your guest. May I suggest we start with our butternut squash soup? It's very warming on a night like this." Anna looked between David and the chef, still seeming unable to believe what was happening. "Are you sure this is okay? I really don't want to cause any trouble." Chef Martinez smiled at her with genuine warmth. "Senora, any friend of Mr. Thompson is welcome in my kitchen. Besides," he added, lowering his voice, "I have a daughter too. Sometimes we all need someone to take care of us." As the chef walked away, Anna turned to David with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't need to thank me," David said. "Just tell me more about Sophia. What's she like?" Anna's face immediately brightened, the way parents' faces do when they talk about their children. "She's incredible. Even in the hospital, she's always trying to make other people feel better. Last week, she taught a younger boy how to fold paper cranes because he was scared about his surgery." David found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested in hearing more. When was the last time he had asked someone about their family, just because he wanted to know? In his world, personal questions were usually strategic, designed to find weaknesses or build alliances. "She sounds special," David said, and he meant it. "She is," Anna continued, her voice growing stronger. "The nurses all love her. She remembers everyone's names, asks about their families. One of them told me that Sophia always says please and thank you, even when she's in pain from the treatments." Anna paused, looking down at her hands. "I taught her that. I told her that no matter how hard life gets, we never lose our manners. We never lose our kindness. Even when we have nothing left, we still have how we treat other people." The words hit David like lightning. He thought about his own behavior over the past few years, how he barked orders at his assistant, how he barely acknowledged the people who served him, how he had stopped seeing others as real people with real lives and real problems. "That's why I said please when I asked for your leftovers," Anna continued. "I know it probably seemed silly, but I want Sophia to know that even when we're desperate, we don't lose who we are." David stared at Anna, feeling something inside him that he hadn't experienced in decades. It was like waking up from a long sleep. For years he had been so focused on building his empire that he had forgotten about building connections with actual human beings. The soup arrived, and David watched as Anna took her first spoonful. The relief and gratitude on her face were so genuine that it made his chest ache. When was the last time he had seen someone truly appreciate something so simple? "This is the most delicious thing I've ever tasted," Anna said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I know that sounds dramatic." "Don't apologize," David said. "When did you last have a hot meal?" Anna thought for a moment. "Really hot, like this?" "Maybe 3 weeks ago, before Sophia got sicker and the bills." She didn't finish the sentence, but David understood. As they ate, Anna told him more about her daughter, how Sophia loved astronomy and wanted to be a scientist, how she collected smooth rocks and painted them with faces, how she always shared her hospital pudding with her roommate even when she barely wanted to eat herself. David found himself hanging on every word. Anna spoke about Sophia with such love and pride that it transformed her entire appearance. Her eyes lit up, her voice grew stronger, and for moments at a time the exhaustion seemed to disappear from her face. "Sophia sounds wise beyond her years," David said when Anna paused to eat more soup. "She is," Anna agreed. "Sometimes I think she's teaching me more than I'm teaching her. Like yesterday, she told me that being poor isn't the same as being broken. She said we're just between chapters right now." The phrase stopped David cold. Between chapters. His own life felt like it had been stuck on the same page for years. Endless repetition of the same routines, the same priorities, the same emptiness. As they moved on to the second course, David realized something remarkable was happening. For the first time in years, he had put his phone away completely. He wasn't thinking about tomorrow's meetings or next week's deadlines. He was simply present, listening to another human being share her story. Around them, other diners had begun to take notice in a different way. At first, they had stared with curiosity or judgment, but as the evening progressed, David could see their expressions changing. A well-dressed woman at a nearby table had stopped eating her own meal and was openly crying as she overheard pieces of Anna's story. An elderly man had quietly asked his waiter to send a dessert to David's table. Even the restaurant staff seemed affected. Robert had begun checking on their table more frequently than necessary, and David noticed him wiping his eyes when he thought no one was looking. The busboy, a young man who usually worked invisibly in the background, had started clearing tables near them just to listen. "Anna," David said suddenly. "Which hospital is Sophia at?" "St. Mary's Children's Hospital," Anna replied. "Do you know it?" David's expression changed completely. He knew St. Mary's very well. His company, Thompson Technologies, had been developing new cancer treatment equipment for the past 5 years. They had partnered with several hospitals, including St. Mary's, to test their latest innovations. "I know it," David said carefully. "What kind of treatment is Sophia receiving?" Anna described the chemotherapy protocol in detail, using medical terms she had clearly learned by necessity. As she spoke, David realized that Sophia was likely receiving treatment that involved equipment his company had helped develop. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a man whose technology was possibly helping to save this woman's daughter, and he had almost missed the chance to really see her as a person. How many other people had he walked past, ignored, or dismissed without realizing their stories might intersect with his own life? "Anna," David said slowly, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. What do you need most right now? Not just tonight, but really. What would help you the most?" Anna was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. Finally, she said, "I need Sophia to get better, but the doctors are already doing everything they can. I need to be able to visit her every day without worrying about bus fare. I need to know that when she gets out of the hospital, we'll have somewhere to go." She paused, then added something that surprised David. "But more than anything, I need her to see that this experience hasn't made me bitter or angry. I need her to know that there are still good people in the world, people who care about strangers, people who help just because it's the right thing to do." Anna looked directly at David. "What you've done tonight, just listening to me, treating me like I matter, that's what I need Sophia to know is possible. That kindness still exists." David felt something shift inside him, like a door that had been locked for years suddenly swinging open. He realized that Anna hadn't just asked him for leftovers. She had reminded him what it meant to be human. 3 days after their dinner at Romano's, David found himself standing outside St. Mary's Children's Hospital, holding a small bag of art supplies and feeling more nervous than he had before any business meeting in his life. He had called Anna the morning after their encounter, asking if he could visit Sophia. The question had seemed to surprise her, but she had said yes with a joy in her voice that made David realize how rarely good things happened in her world. The hospital corridors smelled like disinfectant and hope mixed together. David followed the directions Anna had given him, passing rooms filled with children and families dealing with their own impossible situations. Some rooms were quiet, others filled with soft laughter or gentle music. Each one contained a story he had never bothered to imagine before. Room 314 was halfway down the hall. Through the open door, David could see Anna sitting beside a small bed, reading aloud from a worn paperback book. Her voice was animated, bringing the characters to life for the pale girl lying against the pillows. David knocked softly on the doorframe. "May I come in?" Anna looked up and smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "Sophia, this is Mr. Thompson, the kind man I told you about." The girl in the bed turned toward David and he felt his breath catch. Sophia was tiny, made even smaller by the large hospital bed and the machines surrounding her. A colorful scarf covered her head where her hair had been, but her eyes, the same green as her mother's, were bright and curious. "Hi, Mr. Thompson," Sophia said, her voice clear despite her obvious fatigue. "Mom told me you shared your dinner with her. Thank you for taking care of her." David felt something crack inside his chest. This 12-year-old girl fighting cancer, was thanking him for taking care of her mother. "It's nice to meet you, Sophia. Your mom has told me a lot about you." "Good things. I hope," Sophia said with a smile that reminded David powerfully of Anna. David pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. "Very good things. She told me you love astronomy." Sophia's eyes lit up immediately. "I do. I want to study black holes when I grow up." "Did you know that time moves differently near a black hole? If you got close to one, you could travel to the future just by coming back." For the next hour, David found himself in the most fascinating conversation he'd had in years. Sophia spoke about stars and planets with the enthusiasm of someone much older, asking questions that made David realize how little he knew about the universe beyond his business world. "Mr. Thompson," Sophia said during a pause in their conversation, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you rich?" David was taken aback by the directness of the question. Yes, I suppose I am," Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Mom says rich doesn't mean having money. She says it means having people who care about you and caring about other people. Are you rich like that too?" The question hit David like a physical blow. Was he rich in the way Sophia meant? When was the last time he had cared about someone just because they needed caring about? When was the last time someone had cared about him for reasons that had nothing to do with his money or power? "I'm learning to be," David said honestly. "Good," Sophia said with satisfaction. "Because Mom says the best kind of rich is when you use what you have to help other people feel less poor." Anna had been quiet during most of their conversation, but David could see tears in her eyes as she listened to her daughter's wisdom. That evening, back in his downtown office, David couldn't stop thinking about Sophia's words. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows looking down at the city below. For the first time, instead of seeing buildings and traffic, he found himself wondering about the people in all those lights, their stories, their struggles, their hopes. His assistant knocked on his door. "Mr. Thompson, I have the information you requested about St. Mary's Hospital." David had asked her to research the hospital's programs and needs. As he read through the reports, he learned that St. Mary's struggled constantly with funding. Many families like Anna's couldn't afford the additional support services that made treatment easier: transportation, meals for parents, temporary housing for families from out of town. But what struck David most was a statistic buried in one of the reports. Nearly 30% of the families at St. Mary's experienced food insecurity during their child's treatment. Parents like Anna often skipped meals or went hungry because every dollar went toward their child's care. David thought about Anna asking for his leftovers, and an idea began forming in his mind. The next morning, David called a meeting with his executive team. These were people who had worked with him for years, who knew him as a demanding, profit-focused leader. They looked surprised when he walked into the conference room with a folder full of hospital statistics instead of quarterly reports. "I want to start a program," David announced without preamble. "I want to partner with restaurants across the city to provide meals for families dealing with medical crises." His marketing director, Helen, looked confused. "A charity program? That's not really our area of expertise." "It is now," David said firmly. "I want us to connect high-end restaurants with hospitals and shelters. Instead of throwing away perfectly good food, these restaurants can prepare fresh meals for people who need them." His chief financial officer, James, frowned. "What's the business model? How do we monetize this?" David looked around the table at faces he had seen hundreds of times but perhaps never really looked at before. "We don't monetize it, James, we fund it. This isn't about profit. It's about people." The room fell silent. In 20 years of working together, David had never used the phrase, "it's about people," in a business meeting. "David," Helen said carefully, "this is very unlike you. What brought this on?" David thought about how to explain what had happened to him at Romano's. How do you tell people that a hungry woman asking for leftovers had somehow woken up a part of him he thought was gone forever? Anna smiled softly. "I think we taught each other. You reminded me that there are still people in the world who care about strangers, that even when everything seems hopeless, kindness can appear when you least expect it." As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Robert approached their table with a small wrapped package. "From Chef Martinez," he explained. He wanted Sophia to have something special. Sophia unwrapped the package to find a small cookbook titled Recipes for Hope, with a note from the chef. For a future doctor who understands that healing involves both medicine and kindness. Walking out of Romano's that evening, David realized that the true marvel hadn't been what happened that rainy night a year ago. The true marvel was what continued to happen every day, how one moment of choosing to see another person's humanity had rippled outward in ways none of them could have imagined. Sophia skipped ahead of them toward the car, her painted rock secured safely in David's pocket. Anna walked beside him, no longer the desperate woman who had asked for leftovers, but a friend whose wisdom had changed his life. "You know what I think?" Sophia called back to them. "I think kindness is like those stars I painted. Each one looks small by itself, but together they light up the whole sky." David smiled, understanding that a 12-year-old girl had just explained the secret of a meaningful life better than any business book ever could. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the people we almost walk past, the voices we almost don't hear, the hands we almost don't take. The marvel wasn't that David had money to help. The marvel was that he had learned to see, to listen, and to care. And in a world that often felt dark and divided, that kind of marvel was exactly what everyone needed.